Good evening, everyone, and welcome you all on this Witty Wednesday. And today we have Vikram with us, who is from the Edelweiss Asset Management Company. And I'm sure Vikram has a decade of experience in terms of motivating sub-brokers and managing the theme and learning for us. So prior to this, Vikram was a part of HSBC, Global Asset Management, Reliance Mutual Fund, and I think Vidyut Metalitics Private Limited. So, which is clearly visible that he has a all-round experience in terms of understanding the importance of mutual fund, and that's the reason that today the session which we have kept, it is how to win the SIP. And I'm pretty much confident, and we are all aware that SIP is very crucial to us, and it's really a soft corner for all of us. Let it be for an organization, for a distribution, or for an investor as well. बिकॉज मार्केट कितना भी ऊपर जाए कितना भी नीचे जाए, अगर हमने कंसिस्टेंसी और डिसिप्लिन बना के रखी है तो वेल्थ क्रिएशन और पैसा बनाने से कोई नहीं रोक सकता. सो दैट्स द ब्यूटी ऑफ एसआईपी. And I was pretty impressed looking at the first page itself of the presentation, because it includes marathon, athletics, chess, cricket, chess, hockey. So all the scientific things and things are added to it. But at the end, it is a very simple way to invest, right? So without wasting much time, Vikram, over to you. Just take us to the insight of your presentation, and I'm sure people would be very much excited, because this is the topic where everyone is aware of everything, but still there is a discipline and lack of long-term goal is missing. So over to you.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you very much for setting the context, and good evening to everyone who's on the call. And very honestly, Saurabh has actually hit the nail on the head. Today everyone knows SIP, है ना? If you and I meet, for example, and you know that I work in the mutual fund setup, very probable कि हमारी कॉन्वर्सेशन चली जाएगी उस जगह पे कि आप बोलोगे यार दो तीन स्कीम बताओ ना कहाँ पर मैं एसआईपी करूं. एंड जो मैं स्कीम्स की नाम अगर समझो आपको बता भी देता हूं, तो ये भी बहुत एक हाई प्रोबेबिलिटी हो जाती है कि उसमें से एक आधा स्कीम में तो आप एसआईपी कर भी लो. सो एसआईपी टुडे इज नॉट अ डिफिकल्ट सेल, right? In fact, we are seeing data, that in spite of the volatility in the market, आपने देखा होगा मार्च, मार्च एंड का जो डेटा भी आया, Feb, March were very volatile months, in terms of investments in the equity market. But SIP book has been very healthy. So there is some investor confidence also कि SIP तो करना चाहिए. And वो SIP कर रहा है. एंड एक और चीज, सौरभ ने बहुत ही राइटफुली कही कि लॉट ऑफ आर इन्वेस्ट, आई मीन ऑल ऑफ आर इन्वेस्टर्स रादर, नॉट लॉट, का एक प्राइमरी फोकस टुवर्ड्स इन्वेस्टिंग, अगर मैं कहूँ, there is one goal based investing and everything around that also, but one reason why people are investing and predominantly investing, let's say through the SIP route, is that somewhere they want to create wealth. But unfortunately, wealth creation is not happening for a lot of investors. See, पैसा बन रहा है, right? If you see your returns, you will. I mean, if you'll see returns, a lot of our investors would have made money. But making money and and creating wealth are two different animals. And जब उसका wealth बनेगा, उसका हमारे ऊपर confidence बढ़ेगा, conviction बढ़ेगा, and overall, investments में, his skin will become much more. So today we'll talk of how do you win this SIP match. और ये match जो है उसको हमने different sports में डाल दिया है, right? We are speaking of marathon, we are speaking of athletics, we are speaking of test cricket, we are speaking of chess, hockey. And is her sport में, if you want to become good and you want to master this sport, there are certain traits which you will have to imbibe. एंड वही ट्रेड्स को हमने इम्बाइब करके बोला है कि अगर आप यही ट्रेड को एसआईपी में भी इन्वॉल्व करते हो, एसआईपी में भी इम्बाइब करते हो, तो आपकी जो एसआईपी जर्नी है, एसआईपी पर्पस है, उसमें यू विल बिकम मच 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 मोर सक्सेसफुल. And we need to keep on talking about this to our investors, right? So let's first start with a marathon. When you talk of a marathon, marathon, I mean, a half marathon is usually a 21-kilometer race, right? And similarly, when you talk of SIP, a lot of people say I am make investing in SIP, and जब मैं उनसे बात करता हूँ कि आपका for what is your tenure, usually people tell me 5-7 years. So 7 years primarily वो इसलिए बोलता है because 7 years में हमने डेटा देखा है कि most SIPs में you double your investment. Right? Not maybe always, but a lot of times you think that that is what is going to happen. Unless the markets are in a little bit of a tough time, then obviously that kind of can become different. But that's what the data is. But then I ask them why 5-7 years, and that is where people start thinking, what do you mean by why? Because उसमें पैसा बनेगा, पैसा बनाना है कि wealth बना. That's point number one. And point number two, one thing what about SIP जो हम बात करते हैं is that compounding impact, है ना, कि SIP में आपको compounding मिले. Compounding का मतलब क्या है? आपका पैसा पैसा बनेगा, interest पे interest, right? But how many of our investors are actually able to see that compounding impact? Not many. Similarly, अगर आप मैराथन की बात करते हो, मैराथन 21 kilometers रन करना is not something which you can decide today कि I'm going to run 21 kilometers tomorrow. You can't do that. If you try doing that, your heart rate will hit the roof. Perhaps a cardiac arrest is something which you will have. You'll have to build it. And किसी भी मैराथनर को अगर आप पूछोगे ना, तो one skill that he consistently works on is persistence. कि मैं भागूंगा, every day भागूंगा. बारिश पड़ रही है, गर्मी हो रही है, I am sitting in Mumbai and right now there's a heat wave in Mumbai that is on, but still, he will go for his run either in the early morning or late in the evening. He'll do that. You have to be persistent. Similarly, when you make an SIP, you have to be persistent. You have to think and allow your money to create money. And that is why थोड़ा सा longer horizon रखना चाहिए. So look at this example. We've done this where we've invested in Nifty 50, okay, for a 21-year period, right, from 31st January 2005 to 31st December 2025. So 21-year period. And इसको हमने 7-year buckets में डाला. So if you see this, I mean, when you look at this, first 7 years, your investment is about 8,40,000 rupees. What realistically Nifty 50 returns in 7 years? So 2020, so 2005 से लेके 7 years अगर हम ऐड करते तो 2012 तक जाता है, right? ये 7 years में अगर आप देखोगे तो आपने 840 का जो इन्वेस्टमेंट किया उसमें आपको रिटर्न दिखा सिर्फ 1064. प्राइमरीली कोविड हिट किया, वाज अ डिफिकल्ट पीरियड फॉर इन्वेस्टर्स, सो ये सब पीरियड में यू स्टार्ट थिंकिंग, यार हैव आई मेड दिस SIP, हैव आई मेड द राइट डिसीजन, बिकॉज रिटर्न तो कुछ बना नहीं है, राइट? सबसे बहुत 2.25 लाख रुपए बने. बट यू कंटिन्यू, एक्सक्यूज मी, यू थिंक नहीं यार थोड़ा और कंटिन्यू करते, एक 10,000 रुपए की SIP है, राइट? एंड यू कंटिन्यू. सो आपका इन्वेस्टर उस टाइम पे सोचता है, आपको आपके पास आएगा, बोलेगा यार ये निकाल देते, कुछ बना तो नहीं रहा है. बट आप बोलते हो नहीं, ये मार्केट में ये सिचुएशन थी, अब मार्केट थोड़ा कस्प ऑफ टर्न अराउंड पे थोड़ा टाइम रुक जाते हैं. यू विल सी अ ड्रास्टिक चेंज, एंड देयर इज कन्विक्शन. यू शेयर दैट कन्विक्शन, एंड समवेयर बिकॉज योर कन्विक्शन इज समथिंग जो सामने वाले पे रब ऑफ करता है, द अदर पर्सन डिसाइड्स टू स्टे ऑन. ठीक है, रुक जाते हैं. सो वो थोड़ा टाइम और रुक जाता है, विच इज अनदर 7-year पीरियड, एंड ही कंटिन्यूज ऑन दी SIP. सो ये नेक्स्ट 7 years में टोटल इन्वेस्टमेंट बिकम 1680, एंड योर पोर्टफोलियो इज नाउ शोइंग 40 लाख रुपीज. नाउ द इन्वेस्टर इज थिंकिंग, यार ये तो बहुत अच्छी चीज हो गई है, मेरे पास 40 लाख रुपए बन गए, राइट? दिस इज 60 lakhs, 16 lakhs का अगर हम बात करें, सो ऑलमोस्ट 2.5x के करीब करीब का रिटर्न बन जाता है, वेर यू आर सीइंग a certain alpha of 23 lakhs over your 16 lakhs. Right? So now the investor is thinking, boss, this was very good. Good, I didn't remove that time because of 40 लाख रुपए बन गए. So this is something around 2018, 2019 के बीच में. Right? And अब उसको लगता है अब तो यार अच्छा रिटर्न बन गया, अब थोड़ा निकाल देता हूँ. कुछ करते हैं, प्रॉपर्टी ले लेते हैं, कुछ कर लेते हैं. यूजुअली हाउ पीपल थिंक, कुछ तो निकाले तो थोड़ा प्रिंसिपल तो निकालने तो थोड़ा या तो थोड़ा प्रॉफिट तो निकालने कुछ तो निकाल. एंड दैट इज वेयर मोस्ट पीपल मेक दिस मिस्टेक. एंड हमें भी लगता है यार ठीक है पैसा बना है, थोड़ा चाहिए दे देते, थोड़ा निकालने देते, राइट. एंड दैट इज वेयर द डिफरेंस बिटवीन वेल्थ क्रिएशन एंड पैसा बनाना आ जाता है. बिकॉज लेट्स से उसे नहीं थोड़ा टाइम और रुकते, बिकॉज अब तो जर्नी शुरू हुई है. अब पैसा बना है, अब वेल्थ बनेगा. बट वेल्थ बनाने के लिए अब हमें कंटिन्यू करना पड़ेगा. We have to be persistent on our journey. No, we will create wealth. And let's say you make that person convinced कि थोड़ा सा time और रुक जाइए. And this person stays invested for another 7 odd years. अब उसका टोटल इन्वेस्टमेंट हो जाता है 25,20,000 रुपीज. बट इस पोर्टफोलियो 1 crore 20 lakhs. Now this person is completely convinced कि this was the best decision of my life. वो सोच रहे 10 की जगह 15 डालता, 20 डालता तो कितना बनता, राइट. बिकॉज अब if I would have told you in 2005 you continue up to 2025 and आपके पास एक 1 crore 20 लाख रुपए बन जाएंगे सिर्फ 10,000 रुपए हर महीने डाल के, आप और मैं भी उस टाइम में बहुत शेकी थे, यार यार ऐसा थोड़ी होता. बट इस पीरियड में सब कुछ हुआ है, राइट. कोविड हुआ है, सब प्राइम क्राइसिस हुआ है, यूरोपियन स्लो डाउन हुआ है, चाइना स्लो डाउन हुआ है, योर रशिया यूक्रेन वॉर हुआ है. बट इन स्पाइट ऑफ ऑल ऑफ दिस यू आर सिटिंग हैंडसमली ऑन योर पोर्टफोलियो में, आप और आपका पोर्टफोलियो वैल्यू है 1 crore 20 लाख रुपए. दिस इज वेल्थ. बट टू क्रिएट वेल्थ you have to be persistent in your effort. You have to continue on your journey. आपको हर रोज हर महीने वो इन्वेस्टमेंट करते रहना पड़ेगा. 75% ऑफ दिस गेन इज क्रिएटेड इन द लास्ट 7 years. This is where you're almost creating 5x of your investment. But how many investors of ours are able to do this? And this is Nifty 50, राइट. कोई दूसरा इंडेक्स होता तो शायद उसमें थोड़ा ज्यादा ही बनता. हाउ मेनी इन्वेस्टर्स have we been able to make them persistent on their journey कि नहीं ये कंटिन्यू करेंगे, इसमें पैसा बनेगा. That's the difference between wealth creation and पैसा बनाना. Get your investors to be on the track of wealth creation. Because जब उसका wealth बनेगा, उसका confidence conviction on our advice, on what we are saying will become so high that he will trust us blindly. ये इन्वेस्टर को अगर मैं कोई भी दूसरी स्कीम बोलूंगा उसको लगेगा यार इसने मेरा पैसा बनाया है, राइट. इट्स सो दैट इज वेयर you have to get people to be persistent on their job and get them to create wealth. Think of SIPs like a marathon, long term. People talk long term, but उनका long term horizon is 7 odd years, 5 7 odd years. Push them for more, because जब वो और longer जाएंगे तब पैसा बनने से ज्यादा वेल्थ बनेगा. And wealth creation is something which every investor likes. That is where make people think of SIPs as a marathon first. Next is, think of athletics as a sport. Javelin throwing, so many other sports come in athletics, right? And one quality which every athlete will tell you about, which they have to go through. So athletes usually, you and I follow athletics usually during that Olympic season. जो 4 साल में एक बार आता है, तब हम टीवी पे देखते हैं, हम बहुत सारे एथलेटिक स्पोर्ट्स देखते हैं. हम उसमें एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं कि हमारे कंट्री से कोई कुछ मेडल लेके आएगा. बट फॉर दैट वन इन 4 years फिनोमिना, these athletes practice every day. And it's very painful, for an athletic person. Because, उस जर्नी में उसको इंजरी होती है, they are trying every day, they are trying harder every day. It's a very painful journey. Similarly, when you're making an investments in the equity markets, no investor will always invest during an upside market. उसको डाउनसाइड वोलेटिलिटी का पेन देखना ही पड़ेगा. There is no option, very honestly, because ये है, it's the reality of the market that you will have to see that. And usually, जब पेन एरियाज बढ़ जाती है, जैसे कि अगर हम लास्ट करंट सिचुएशन देखेंगे लास्ट 4 महीने की, specifically last 2 months की, where there is a West Asia war. A lot of SIP investors are thinking नहीं अभी तो SIP मुझे रोक देनी चाहिए, बिकॉज ये तो वॉलिटिलिटी कब तक चलेगी क्या होगा पता नहीं, यू नो एंड पीपल ट्राई टू बी लिटिल स्मार्ट कि नहीं रुक जाते हैं, डिसकंटिन्यू करें, बिकॉज वो पेन जो हो रहा है, वो पेन उनको लगता है इज अनबेरेबल, पीपल आर ओके विथ लेस रिटर्न्स. A lot of investors are not okay with negative returns. The good part is, SIP data in terms of what Amphi has been sharing is telling me that people are becoming a little more mature. उनको समझ में आता है कि मार्केट्स है ऊपर नीचे जाएगी, आई नीड टू स्टे इन्वेस्ट, एंड वी नीड टू एंश्योर दैट आवर इन्वेस्टर्स स्टे इन्वेस्टेड, बिकॉज ये पेनफुल एरिया झेलना पड़ेगा. Right? And look at these two instances over here where we are talking, about this pain area. One is obviously the COVID time. Sure, I'm predominantly, I'll speak in English if that's what everyone wants. I was told that English Hindi is what I should be switching between. But if English is preferred, I am more than happy to continue in that language too. There are two areas, specifically. One is the 2008 subprime crisis, and the other one is during the COVID crisis. uh, where because of the sudden excess volatility, some investors stopped. So some one investor in started investing in, or rather we are showing current and a little beyond current. Some investors started in 2018, April 2020, thought this was too much to bear, a negative return of 16%, decided I'm going to stop my SIP, with and settled for a loss of about 16 odd percent. But somebody who just continued a little more, from 2020 to 2023, not much, I mean, just a little 2, 3 year more, created a 13.5% return. Similarly, somebody started at the peak of 2024, when markets were at its peak in August of 2024. By March 2025, has a negative return of 6%, decided that no, I don't want to continue. But just December of 2025, you know, just 9 months later, there's a positive return of almost 10.5% plus, or 11%, close to about 11%, 10.68% to be precise. So people think that this volatility is something which I should be smart about, and I should not be able, I should not see the pain. But there is no investor who will only see the gains. If I have to see the gains, there has to be periods of pain which I will need to endure. So that is where, as an as an as an investor, or as a distribution partner, as an advisor, to investors, I need to tell them that these are, yes, it's the negatives is painful, right? I mean, but it is an uncontrollable. How will removing money or how will stopping SIP help you? And in fact, if you continue, there is this concept which we keep on talking about, the averaging concept, right? And SIPs are great, more so when markets are falling, primarily because it gives you additional units. See, what is SIP? A date on which a fixed amount gets debited from your bank account, and mutual fund units of the scheme that you have chosen gets credited into your mutual fund. When markets are falling, NAVs are also falling. And because NAVs are falling, you get more number of units. Now, important part to remember is markets don't always continue to fall for a long period of time. At a certain point of time, it will turn around, right? And when it turns around, all of these extra units that you create, that you got because the markets were falling, were the ones which have helped you average your cost, because of which you are now seeing capital gains into your account. So think of SIPs like an athletic sport. For an athlete will have to endure the pain for that one moment of gain where he is able to get his hands or her hands to the medal. It's a very tough period, practice every day, show up, you will get injured, there's perhaps not a great infra thing that we have in our country. Slowly it's changing, but it's very painful. But they endure that pain because they think that there is that one medal to gain. SIPs during volatile markets can be painful. You will see returns, you will not see great returns, you will see negative returns, and it starts playing on your mind. Negative returns have got a very funny thing, right? I mean, they start playing on your mind where you start thinking, did you make the right decision? Is this the right scheme? What if I would have invested in some other scheme? A lot of thoughts. What if I would have invested in some other asset class? Uh, you know, and all of that somewhere, because you're not making money as an investor, I'm talking, the investor mind is saying that I need to do something, some corrective course of action needs to be taken. And in a lot of instances, that corrective course of action is not required. What is required is that as an investor, just bear that momentary period of pain. And as a partner to that investor, we need to keep on telling them what are the good things. So yes, markets are volatile. I mean, if you look at the current situation, markets are volatile because there's a West Asia war involving Iran, Israel, and America. So oil is the biggest casualty, which is happening. But I mean, there are some good things about the economy too, right? I mean, today the prices at which a lot of companies are available are at a great discounted prices. The PEs have come down. People were talking that the PE valuations are very high. They've finally corrected very, very attractive level. And this attractive level tells me that if these companies start showing better numbers in the quarters of the coming year, then that better numbers in terms of profitability will start showing in the price jumping very, very fast. So that's something which is happening. GDP numbers are still looking great, pegged to grow at about 6 odd percent as per RBI. Sorry, 6.9% as per RBI. So 7%, 6.9% are very, very healthy number. Inflation is still within controllable range. India has very, very good relations, across the board with all countries, because of which, the oil and gas supply, though limited, but we are still getting that from Iran and all other countries. So all of these things are helping us to bounce back quicker than everyone else. So these are all the good parts. So let's just wait this tide out because the tide will turn. And when the tide turns and there is gain to make, only the investor who has stayed and bared this pain will see the gain. So that is where, this is something which, you should tell them about what are the good points and how this will help, an investor in the good times. So that's the second spot. The third is, test cricket. Any cricket lover will tell you that it is test cricket which is real cricket because it is a test of, how technically correct you are. As a batsman in test cricket, it is very, very important to know where off stump is, right? Because any ball outside the off stump in test cricket, it is said that it is best to leave. Uh, so that you only play those balls which are coming on your wicket. And as a bowler, you have to continually bowl at that niggling outside offline, waiting for that one edge, right? So similarly, when you make an SIP, the idea is that you have to think over the long term period. Think of SIP wealth creation as test cricket. Yes, it is the world of T20. Everyone wants to see those big fours and sixes. It's great, right? I mean, when you see extra unexpected returns in your portfolio. It makes investors very, very excited, but that's returns, that's not wealth. If you want to see people, or if you want to see your investor create wealth, then they will have to equate SIP investing with test cricket. Look at this, an investor, we are showing this data where we are saying that if any investor has stayed at least for a 10-year period, he has never earned negative return. No investor over a 10-year period has earned negative returns. That means he or she has never got out. Now, the returns may be less depending on the period, but period to period. But what we are saying is that this is the least that an investor has made. Most investors have made much, much more. We've seen a lot of data that somebody who stays invested for about 10-year period is about, so in about 7 years, usually we've seen data which is showing that you double your SIP. So in about 10 years, you'll see about 2.5, 3x at least, right? On a lot of periods. But whatever it may be, the point is you're not making negative return. Look at this data also, it's mostly averaged over 15 odd percent. Just one period, where the returns really fell sometime in 2020, where your returns shrunk. But it was still not negative. It was still not negative. That year you didn't make a lot of money, but you still made something on the overall thing, right? So tell people that investing, wealth creation is a long-term play. It is like test cricket. It is not T20 where you will, get that adrenaline rush. It is about staying focused, staying on the pitch. It is about continuing with your SIPs irrespective of market situations, market conditions. Because if you stay invested for at least a 10-year period, you will see that you have never seen a negative return. And that by itself is a lot of, positive in terms of an investor. Because beyond this, it will clearly mean that you will never see a negative return, minimum 10 years. You will always see something positive in your portfolio. So you have to get people now to think beyond that 5, 7 years. Tell them no, think 21 years, minimum 10 years. You will see that you are making money. Not only making money, you will see that you will never make negative return money after that. So that's what you have to get people to now focus on an even longer term. Increasingly consistent, on the longer duration. So your returns increase consistently when you stay longer. So get people to think of SIPs like test cricket. Test cricket is longer format. You have to ensure that you don't get out as a batsman. And for that, in an SIP also wealth creation, you ensure that you don't get negative returns. For that, you have to stay for at least 10 odd years. So that's the third one, right? When we talk of test cricket. The fourth sport that I'm going to talk to you about is chess. And chess is a very, very interesting, sport, because, it's more of a mind game, right? I mean, you work on memory in sport. And, chess it is said, anyone who follows chess, reads about chess. It's very interesting, it is said that whenever you move anything, you should think of two moves ahead. So if I move, let's say my rook from point A to point B, then what is it? What all can my opponent move? Basis that, what will I move? Then basis that, what will my opponent move? And then again, what I will move. So two moves ahead. And it's predominantly a memory issue, right? I mean, because in chess, there's a lot of practice. You can't have a grandmaster just get up and be completely natural, right? I mean, I'm sitting and just starting to play, and I'm starting to beat everyone. Doesn't happen. You read, you practice, you practice, you practice, you practice. You may have a natural flair for the game, but it is what practice makes, grandmasters, Uh, Similarly, in SIPs, people look at their muscle memory and, they decide that, this is not a great period. I'm going to pause my SIP. And they start thinking this is a great move, but they forget the very basics that every installment counts. Look at this instance, right? I mean, when we are talking of a period from 2007 to 2010, people thought that, I'm going to pause by SIP. So this person started investing between the period of 2007 and 2010, just made about, paused for 15 installments and invested 2 lakh 10. And person A, and he's thinking that, wow, I'm so smart, I've still made money. I've made about 2 lakh 70 or thousand rupees. That's 28% returns. But person B just followed the basics and said, no, I will continue investing. And that person invested for the entire 3 year period. So invested 360, 10,000 rupees every month. And saw a return of 36%. Uh, you know, so in that sense, you can very clearly see that person B, just putting his head down and remembering that basic, that every installment counts. Just like in chess, every move counts. You can't just make a move and think, I'll see what to do with this. So for your question number one, I mean, if I'm just starting, yes, a good experience, a more safer experience to build my confidence conviction will perhaps come from multi-cap, flexi-cap, large cap. But looking at your risk appetite, looking at your age, I think is a more looking at your investment horizon, looking at what are your expected returns, I think is a much better way because it kind of gives you a more customized solution. To be very honest, rather than just going and saying the isko first experience should be a little more safer experience. I in these schemes I may be making decent, but my expectation or my requirement may be a little more than this. So unless it becomes something where I'm able to judge that and then make an investment choice. Investments today have to be a little more customized, in my opinion. So that is where I think you should be focused on. The second one, somebody who's been on the journey 5, 7, 8 years, has seen returns, has seen ups and downs, has some conviction, has some stress with regards to current situation. Uh, if there is a requirement which he or she is needing in the next 1 or 2 years, then rebalancing should be the way. If the person can absorb this and continue for another 5, 7 years and maybe beyond, then continue in BAU as it is, rather than making too many changes, should be the way, to be very honest.
So I request participant, I have shared the link as well. I would urge everyone to share your feedback on that link. So that would be great. And in case if you have anything, you have a question related to this, you can put it on the chat box. So that would be great if you want to interact or ask a question to Vikram directly. Vikram, last question. The way people are thinking, the AI model and everything is on, right? Right. People have started thinking about IT. People have started uh, thinking about this artificial intelligence. Uh, do you still feel that when we compare two categories of fund, one is a normal flexi cap, large cap, or a multi cap strategy, whereas on the other side you have this thematic concept.
Mm.
So anybody putting SIP in the thematic concept for a longer duration, or somebody preferring large cap, flexi cap, multi cap for a 10-year duration, which one should you prefer should be the first criteria? And after that, if you want to add up something, or you need to add on or step up something, then you can opt for these fancy items which are available in market.
So very honestly, for a long-term 10-year type of horizon, I would still prefer to be in the market cap side, flexi cap, mid cap, uh, multi cap, because these thematics, if you're looking, are very, very tactical bets which people can play on. You think manufacturing will work for the next 3, 4 years, defense will work for the next 3, 4 years. Technology, you can play that differently. In the long term, in thematics, if the cycle works somewhere in the negative, like technology, the large tech companies today, I mean, if you see, because of this AI, coming in, may perhaps be in a bit of a stress, in the current way that things are. Not saying they will continue to be in stress, because they are large companies, right? They will adapt, they will adopt. So that kind of, I think thematics are great in terms of tactical plays. Long term, I would still think market cap based schemes work better.
So we have a question from from Lakshman. This is like, what will the strategy for the clients who have got good money from the redemption due to tax harvesting during March 2026? What will be your advice whether to invest in a lump sum or STP mode? Kindly explain.
So very honestly, personally, I think lump sum works if you have a long-term horizon. But from an investor standpoint, I understand volatility is not their greatest friend. And if you see some negative returns for the next 2, 3, 4 months, it is something which will stress them out, which in turn will stress you out. So it is best then to look at an STP mode if there is no conviction, to bear the pain in the short-term horizon. And STP over a 6 months to 1 year is something which should be deployed.
Any formula or secret ingredient
Hmm.
to increase the SIP book? This is from Sachin.
Uh, See, SIP today is very easy. You talk to people persistently, tell them long-term wealth, SIP, simple. Get people to increase their SIP on a year-on-year basis. Somebody who's doing 5,000 with you today can easily do 6,000, 5,500 next year. But you have to go to them, tell them, nahi, SIP badhana hai. Somebody doing 10,000 can easily give you 11, 12,000. Somebody doing 25,000 can easily take this to 30,000. It's get them financial discipline. Consistency is equal to long-term wealth creation. This has to be your mantra, which you keep on repeating. As you keep on repeating it, some with a degree of conviction, it is something which will start hitting people, in the right way, and they will also start imbibing that mantra.
So we'll have a last question. Which market cap is best suited for aggressive investors?
Again, it's personal, but aggressive usually would border between mid and small, right?
Right. In fact, if you have a, I don't, I'm surprised. Maybe if you can correct me whether I'm right or wrong. In fact, after pitching the SIF, right, you can start SIP in that as well. So again,
Yes,
it's totally upon the risk appetite of the
absolutely.
investor, right? And
Yes.
I won't be surprised. Maybe another 2, 3 years or down the line, people will start talking about SIF में कितनी SIP चल रही है. So that
Yes,
can be the new
that's
line you can witness in the market.
absolutely. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So thank you, Vikram. Thanks you so much for sharing your wisdom of thought, especially on this beautiful subject of SIP. And thanks everyone for joining, and look forward to see you in next Wednesday as well. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, everyone. See
Thanks.
you. Bye-bye.